Hey everybody, John the Other here, obviously. Now, as a stalwart believer in the absolute truthiness of Christie Clarke, the Premier of the province of British Columbia, I'm going to need some help. The Premier of BC is claiming in today's Vancouver Sun that she was the victim of an attempted violent stranger rape, and I, for one, believe her with absolute and religious conviction. According to the Vancouver Sun cover story, she was about 15 years old and walking to her first ever job as a waitress. During her walk, she was grabbed suddenly by a strange and sudden fellow and dragged, also suddenly, into a shrubbery. A nice one. She narrowly escaped her rapist by immediately wiggling free and then, quote, ran like the wind and kept running all the way to her job. On arrival, and not in the slightest out of breath or visibly assaulted, she put on her apron and went to work as if nothing had happened. Now, this is a totally believable and plausible story. However, it's likely that she was out of breath and near to hysterical and was questioned by a coworker who helped her calm down so that nobody else noticed. That certainly will sound better the next time this story is told. So Premier Clarke should not leave those factually true details out the next time this is talked about. But she didn't tell anyone else anything because she was ashamed. But ashamed of what? In her own story, she was not raped, she was grabbed, she wiggled free, and she scampered away unharmed and unraped. Not even any groping. She got away without penetration. No mention of hands on any sexual part of herself. But if she was only grabbed, this would be just a common assault with an unknown intent. So, obviously, there must have been a sexual component. Otherwise, what that part about the shame and a 35-year silence wouldn't make any sense. And we know this story has to be true. Therefore, there was obviously some kind of a sexual element in the grabbing. Fortunately for all of us, she wiggled immediately free and ran, wind-like, to her place of employment where she went immediately to work with no word of her adventure to anyone except that one person she didn't mention in her first telling to protect them from public scrutiny, as that person, whoever it was, protected her all those years ago. Of course, she was groped, and her breast was grabbed, right? Or maybe her behind. And she left all that out of the story because she's now the premier of the province, and decorum, and the dignity of her office, and so on. So when she retells this story the next time, these details will put to rest any cynical doubters and naysayers who might now be saying nay. Obviously, without mention of sexual grabbing or, say, verbal threats like, I'm going to rape you, from her assailant, the story does not hold together logically. So, of course, those things happened. They did. And it is only the terrible trauma of that 35 years ago almost rape now obscuring her memory in its first traumatic retelling. If there was no sexual component, then what would be the source of shame that drove her 35-year silence? Obviously, Premier Clarke was sexually grabbed and encountered a stranger's rough hands in all the wrong places, like behind a shrubbery, because what else would silence this important and truthful story without those sexual elements to her assault? It is only cynics and misogynists and rape apologists who would read this terrible 35-year-old news and say that the most plausible statement in the Vancouver Sun cover story was the statement, "It is as though they never happened." It's all true, of course, because a politician would never lie to advance a political agenda or ram legislation home. I believe Christie. Thank you all for your very, very, very kind attention, and have a lovely, lovely day.